The storm rolled in suddenly, a violent swirl of rain and wind that lashed against the windows of the old Victorian house. Lily stood at the base of the attic stairs, clutching a flashlight in one hand and Aaron's hand in the other. She'd been eager to explore every nook and cranny of their new home, but the attic had always felt different, as if it were waiting for them. "Are you sure about this?" Aaron asked, his voice barely audible over the creaks of the old house. His tone carried a teasing edge, but Lily saw the faint hesitation in his eyes. "It's just an attic," she said, forcing a laugh. "What's the worst that could happen? A couple of spiders." He sighed, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and gestured for her to lead the way. The wooden stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed. The air grew colder with each step, and the musty smell of forgotten years enveloped them. The attic was just as they'd expected, dark, cluttered, and heavy with dust. Boxes were piled high against the walls, their cardboard sides sagging with age. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, its feeble light barely cutting through the shadows. "Look at this," Lily whispered, stepping carefully between scattered knickknacks and a stack of yellowed newspapers. "It's like someone just stopped living up here." Aaron wandered toward an old rocking chair in the corner, its paint chipped and peeling. He gave it a light push, and the soft creak of its movement made Lily's stomach tighten. She was about to tell him to stop when something caught her eye, a glint of brass beneath a moth-eaten blanket. She crouched, peeling back the fabric to reveal a small wooden box, its surface scratched and scarred with age. A tarnished latch secured the lid, and the brass inlay on the top spelled out a single word in elegant script: remembrance. "Aaron, come here," she called, her voice unsteady. He was at her side in moments, frowning down at the box. "That's weird. Should we open it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Might as well. What's a haunted attic without a mysterious box?" Lily ignored the joke and unfastened the latch. The lid creaked as it lifted, revealing rows of small glass jars nestled in dark velvet. At first, she thought they were jam jars or old medicine bottles, but when she picked one up, the truth hit her like a cold wave. Inside was a heart, preserved, perfectly intact, and suspended in some kind of viscous, amber liquid. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned the jar in her hands. A faded label clung to the glass, the ink smudged but legible. "Margaret, 1873. "What the hell is this?" Aaron murmured, taking another jar from the box. His hands were shaking as he read the label. "David, 1881. One by one, they lifted the jars from the box, each labeled with a name and a year. Some dates were recent, too recent. The last jar bore the name Eleanor and the year 2015. Lily's stomach churned. "This is sick. Who does this?" "I don't know, but we should call someone. The police, maybe?" As he spoke, the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and Lily swore she heard the faintest whisper, like breath stirring the dust. She whipped her head toward the attic door, but nothing was there. "We'll call tomorrow," Aaron said, setting the jar back into the box. "It's probably some kind of historical thing. Freaky, but explainable." Lily nodded, but the weight in her chest didn't lift. As they left the attic, she glanced back at the box. For a moment she thought she saw one of the jars trembling. The following days passed in a blur of unease. Lily couldn't stop thinking about the box or the names on the jars. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the pale, preserved hearts floating in their amber prisons, the labels staring back at her like accusations. Aaron was more dismissive, though even he seemed unnerved. "It's probably just a weird family relic," he said over breakfast. "Something left behind by the previous owners." "Then why didn't they take it with them?" Lily countered, pushing her cereal around the bowl. "And what about the names? The dates. He didn't have an answer. That night, the whispers began. Lily woke with a start, her heart racing. The room was silent except for Aaron's soft breathing beside her. But something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, and there was a faint, rhythmic thudding above her, too deliberate to be the house settling. She nudged Aaron awake. "Do you hear that?" He groaned and rolled over, listening. "It's probably the wind." But Lily knew it wasn't. She sat up, straining to hear. The sound came again, closer now. A soft, muffled knock, like someone tapping gently on the attic door. The next morning, she found herself compelled to research the names. She dug through old records online, scrolling through faded obituaries and news clippings. Her stomach dropped when she discovered the first connection. Margaret, the first name on the jars, had gone missing in 1873, the same year marked on the jar. It wasn't a coincidence. Her research turned up more names, each tied to a local disappearance. Each case was eerily similar. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, just people vanishing, their fates a mystery. By the time Aaron returned home from work, she was frantic. "The hearts, they're from missing people," she said, thrusting a printout into his hands. "Lily, you're jumping to conclusions." But she wasn't. That night the whispers grew louder. A voice, soft and fragmented, seemed to call from the attic. "Find us. Forgotten." The sound sent chills down her spine. And when she glanced at Aaron, she saw the fear in his eyes. He heard it too. The attic door stood ajar. Lily couldn't remember leaving it open, but there it was, gaping like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. She stood at the base of the stairs, clutching a flashlight, the beam trembling as her grip tightened. Aaron was behind her, silent but rigid, his breath shallow. "We shouldn't go up there," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't ignore it," Lily replied, forcing steel into her tone. "The whispers won't stop. They're trying to tell us something." Aaron shook his head, but he didn't stop her as she started climbing. The steps groaned beneath her weight, each creak louder than the last. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at her skin. When she reached the attic, the beam of her flashlight swept across the space. Everything looked the same: the forgotten boxes, the sagging furniture, the eerie waiting stillness. But then, the box caught her eye. It was no longer where they had left it. Instead, it sat in the center of the room, as if it had moved on its own. "Aaron," Lily called, her voice trembling. "Look at this." He joined her reluctantly, his face pale. "That's not possible. We left it in the corner." Before she could reply, the whispering began again. This time it wasn't faint or distant. It was right there, all around them, rising and falling like a ghostly tide. Words overlapped, fragmented and desperate. She could make out pieces. "Free us." "Forgotten." "Him." The temperature plummeted further, and Lily's breath fogged in the beam of her flashlight. As she reached for the box, a shadow shifted at the edge of her vision. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Aaron nodded, his face ashen. "We need to leave. Now." But as they turned to go, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was faint at first, barely more than a silhouette, but it grew clearer with each passing second. It was a woman, pale and translucent, her face twisted with sorrow. She clutched one of the jars, the label visible even in the dim light. "Margaret." "Help us," the apparition pleaded, her voice soft yet echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "Please, wait, find him. End it." Lily's knees buckled, and she gripped Aaron's arm for support. "Who?" she managed to ask, though her voice was barely audible. The spirit's gaze shifted toward the box. The doctor, he kept us here, our hearts, our souls, bound to this place. Aaron pulled Lily back toward the stairs, his voice sharp. We can't deal with this. This isn't real. It's real, Lily snapped, pulling free. We can't just leave them like this. The spirit reached toward Lily, her hand passing through the air like mist. Find the last 2 jars, she whispered, before it's too late. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. The attic fell silent, the temperature returning to normal, though the oppressive weight of the room remained. Lily turned to the box, her hands trembling as she rifled through the jars. Her breath hitched when she found them. 2 jars labeled Lily and Aaron. The dates were set a week from now. She showed Aaron, her voice breaking. We're next. The next days were a blur of fear and desperate research. Lily scoured records, online forums, and local archives, piecing together the horrific story of the house. The original owner, Dr. Elias Caro, had been a surgeon in the late 1800s. Revered for his skill, he was also whispered to be obsessed with the occult. His experiments had centered on the preservation of human essence, which he believed resided in the heart. He didn't just kill them, Lily told Aaron, her voice raw with exhaustion. He trapped them here. He thought he could capture their souls. Aaron paced the living room, his movements jerky. And now we're supposed to believe he's still here. That he's, what, haunting us? Lily didn't answer. She was staring at the jars on the table. The amber liquid seemed darker now, thicker, and the hearts within pulsed faintly, as if they were still alive. The whispers returned that night. Louder, more urgent. Lily woke to find herself standing at the attic door, her hand on the knob, though she had no memory of getting out of bed. The voices called her name, imploring her to act, to help, but they weren't alone. When she turned, she saw him. The doctor. His form was faint, but distinct, his tall frame clad in a shadowy coat, his eyes glinting like cold steel. He stood at the end of the hall, motionless, watching her. Leave, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. They are mine. Lily stumbled back, her scream waking Aaron. He rushed to her side, but by the time he turned to look, the figure was gone. The next morning, they prepared the ritual. The spirits had told her what to do, how to break the curse. It required destroying the jars, but not by simple means. A specific ritual had to be performed, one that would sever the ties binding the hearts to the house. The instructions were scattered across old texts and half-legible scribbles in Caro's journal, which Lily had unearthed in the town's archive. That night, as the clock struck midnight, they returned to the attic. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers surrounded them, urging them on. Lily placed the jars in a circle, drawing the symbols she had memorized from the journal. Aaron held a lighter, his hands shaking as she began to chant the incantation. The attic grew colder with every word, the shadows twisting and writhing around them. The doctor appeared again, his form now solid, his face twisted with rage. You will not take them, he bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder. He lunged toward Lily, but Aaron stepped in front of her, wielding a crowbar. The clash that followed was surreal, Aaron swinging at an enemy who seemed to dissipate and reform with every strike. Lily focused on the ritual, her voice rising above the chaos. When she spoke the final word, the jars shattered. A deafening roar filled the attic as the spirits were freed, their forms glowing with an ethereal light before fading into nothingness. The doctor screamed, his figure crumbling like ash caught in the wind. Then, silence. The silence in the attic was suffocating, as if the house itself held its breath. The shards of the jars glistened on the floor, catching the dim light from Lily's flashlight. The air, once thick with whispers and dread, felt strangely hollow now, like a vacuum left behind by something immense and malevolent. "It's over," Aaron breathed, his voice trembling. His knuckles were white where he gripped the crowbar, and his eyes darted around the room as though expecting the doctor to reappear. Lily wasn't so sure. She knelt by the remnants of the jars, her fingers brushing the sticky amber liquid that had once held the hearts. It felt warm, almost alive, as it seeped into the floorboards. The attic was quiet, but the silence felt wrong. Not peaceful, but watchful. The whisper came softly, almost imperceptible. "Not yet." Lily jerked upright, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she asked, spinning to face Aaron. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the doctor's shadow had last loomed. "Hear what?" But Lily didn't answer. Her eyes were drawn to the attic wall, where something new had appeared, faint scratches in the wood, forming words that hadn't been there moments ago. "He is bound, but you are marked." "Lily," Aaron called, his voice breaking her trance. "Let's go. We need to leave this place." She nodded, her throat dry, and followed him down the stairs, each step creaking beneath their weight. The house seemed heavier now, the walls pressing inward as if mourning the loss of its terrible secret. By the time they reached the living room, Lily's hands were shaking. They didn't speak as they gathered their things. Aaron worked quickly, tossing clothes into bags and grabbing their coats from the rack. Lily paused by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. For a moment she swore she saw a face in the smoke, a pale, sorrowful visage that disappeared as quickly as it came. "Let's go," Aaron urged, snapping her out of her daze. The drive away from the house was steeped in an oppressive quiet. Neither of them spoke, the weight of what they had done pressing heavily on their shoulders. As they passed the edge of the property, Lily felt a strange pull, a sensation like invisible fingers tugging at her chest. She shivered and turned her head, catching one last glimpse of the attic window. For a split second she thought she saw movement, a shadow retreating into the dark. In the days that followed, Lily and Aaron stayed in a hotel on the outskirts of town. The change in scenery did little to ease the gnawing tension between them. Aaron seemed determined to move on, throwing himself into plans to sell the house and forget the nightmare. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The first sign came the third night. As Lily stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth, she noticed something out of place. The condensation on the glass, faint and uneven, had formed a word. Lily. Her stomach churned. She wiped the mirror clean and tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the unease followed her to bed. That night she dreamt of the attic, of jars that refused to break and shadows that whispered her name. The following day, her fears deepened. While unpacking a bag, she found it. The jar with her name on it. The one she had destroyed. It was whole, the glass unblemished, the liquid inside darker than she remembered. The heart within pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. "Aaron," she gasped, clutching the jar like it might explode. He stared at it, his face pale. "That's not possible. We saw it break." But there it was, cold and undeniable. The jar, her heart, her name. That night, Lily lay awake, the jar placed carefully on the far side of the room, where it sat like a sinister sentinel. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of the doctor's hollow eyes and the whispered promise, "You are marked." At 3 a.m. she woke to a soft thud. Her heart raced as she turned on the lamp, its light weak against the oppressive darkness. The jar had moved. It now sat on her bedside table, the heart inside beating steadily. Aaron woke to her scream, but by the time he turned on the overhead light, the jar was back on the dresser, as if it had never moved. They fled the next day, leaving the house, the jar, and everything else behind. But the whispers followed. No matter where they went, Lily couldn't escape the faint sound of her name spoken just beyond her hearing. In mirrors and reflective surfaces, she saw fleeting images of the attic, the box, and the doctor's shadow. Months passed, but the dread only grew. And one night, as she stared into her reflection, Lily saw her own face begin to change, her eyes dulling, her skin paling, her features taking on the same spectral quality as Margaret's. The whispers grew louder. "You are marked. He is bound, but you will remain." And deep in the shadows, in a place no light could reach, the doctor smiled,